February 29, 2020, and this is the Carson City Planning Commission meeting. Call the roll, please.
Vice Chair Borders.
Here.
Commissioner Eswine. Here. Commissioner Doors. Here. Commissioner Wiggins. Here. Commissioner Preston. Here. Commissioner Hittingle. Here. A quorum's present.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Wiggins, would you lead us in the pledge, please? The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topics that is relevant to or within the authority of the Planning Commission, including any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda as an action item. Are there any public comments at this time? Please sign in on the sign-in sheet, and when you turn the mic on, make sure it's green.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Commissioners. Denny French, Carson City, Nevada. Hello. I've gotten my meetings mixed up recently, which is not unusual for me. However, I do have a bit of a script here, and if I get off of the set as far as what's allowed for this statement, please reel me in quickly so I don't take any more of your time than necessary. I'd like to start with the protections for present homeowners as related to projects such as Lampa Ranch and Anderson Ranch, making sure that their interests are considered as it's developed and as it changes the water tables and the flood flow areas, that they are being protected as best they can by the developers' considerations in their building. I'd like to also say that I think that the menu plan is not in the best interest of the community and shameless. I'd like to also suggest that 1710 be reconsidered as a better route. It would allow the community to know what was coming in a set understanding, what per acre could be put on that property and what type of structures could be added. Also, in the consideration of the latest Supreme Court decision in Reno, I'd like to suggest that we might want to follow what's suggested by Sam Gross of the Reno Gazette-Journal on July 31st relating to the situation that Reno's finding itself in with regard to the possible consideration at that time of the Supreme Court relating to the location of Swan Lake, Lemon Valley properties that were involved in the flooding damages. Turns around that after that date, there was a finding that suggests that Reno was indeed the final person to sort of aim their liabilities towards, and that they now have to figure out in the lower courts what that would mean, what kind of compensation.
Sir, that does not have relevance to Carson City.
Well, in this case, I believe, if you'll let me continue, that I will bring that into content. Good Perry Mason ties it in as soon as they can, but without that explanation, you would be missing part of the concern. The concern is that we could put ourselves possibly and potentially in a situation where our zoning would put us in liability position, not the developer, not the homeowner themselves, but that Carson City could end up liable for the damages done had we said, no, you can't build there because it's not safe to. Even a warning, in this case, it's suggesting a warning to the property owners in advance will not eliminate their responsibilities, and would not in our case. We could warn everybody of sound problems, light problems, noise problems, traffic problems. They could say, yes, yes, yes. You say they're in a flood zone, they say, fine. And then you turn around as a city, as we would, liable. So that's where it ties in. While it is a Reno case, it's adding a much bigger picture, especially since it was related to by the Supreme Court. And that sets precedents, I think. We should require anyone developing to sign a waiver a liability agreement such that Reno and others, well, in this case Carson, would not be seriously considered for liability that other agents would be in between. And so that's my statement. Thank you very much for your patience. I hope that those cases will bring you some reason for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. For possible action now is the approval of the minutes of, pardon? I'm sorry. Is that all the public comment? Please come down forward. Thank you. This is public comment that for items not on the current agenda, that are not on the agenda. For items on the agenda, we will have a separate public comment. Are there any other general public comments at this time? All right, seeing no more, then the next item is the approval of the minutes of December 17th, 2019. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes as they were sent out? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I move to approve.
Is there a second?
A second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Abstain.
One abstention. Modification of the agenda. Items on the agenda may be taken out of order. The public body may combine two or more agenda items for consideration, and the public body may remove an item from the agenda and delay discussion related to an item on the agenda at this time. The only question I have is the first four items are, they should be, I think, considered in a specific order. They are on the agenda, but they're not necessarily on the data that we've received. So could you give us some guidance and ideas to how we should proceed with those four items?
In general, there is no modification to the agenda, so let me say that first. Secondly, the first four items will be presented by staff in one staff presentation. I believe the applicant, should he make a presentation, will also address them in a single presentation. I would suggest the commission take a single set of public comment on that because it's hard to separate out the items. But the commission's actions will be four separate actions. There are four separate items before you.
Should we read them each, all four, to begin with, or how should we proceed with that?
Ben Johnson, Deputy District Attorney for the record. You don't have to read each one into the record. You can just state that you're taking the first four, and staff can generally describe what they are.
Okay. Well, in that case, items E1, 2, 3, and 4, which deal primarily with the development of one particular property on Emerson Drive. Let's see, APN 002751107. Heather, you want to go ahead and lead us through this?
Sure.
Thank you.
Heather Ferris, Associate Planner for the record. The subject property is 5.5 acres in size and zone neighborhood business. The property is surrounded by both commercial and residential uses, as well as commercial and residential zoning districts. The applicant is seeking approval for a tentative subdivision map, a special use permit to allow a residential use in a non-residential zoning district, a variance to allow for a decreased setback along the southernmost property line, and a special use permit to allow for tandem parking to be counted towards the minimum parking requirement. The tentative map proposes 37 lots for single-family detached development and one 0.9 acre common area lot for the on-site detention basin and existing trail easement, which is along the northern boundary of the property. 2 points of access are proposed to connect to Emerson Drive via the proposed roadway serving the development. The project also proposes the abandonment of a portion of the NV Energy easement. So the map is also providing an access easement and maintenance road for the substation, which is located in the eastern portion of the project site. The tentative map is conditioned upon the approval of the other three requests. Carson City Municipal Code 18.04.120.3 allows for residential uses in the neighborhood neighborhood business zoning district, subject to first obtaining a special use permit and demonstrating compliance with the supplemental standards that are outlined in 1.18 of the development standards. There is no maximum density within non-residential zoning districts, subject to meeting the height, setback, parking, and open space requirements. The proposed density for the project is 6.72 units per acre. The average lot size is 3,811 square feet, with the largest lot being 6,189 square feet and the smallest being 2,933 square feet. The maximum height proposed is 26 feet, which is to the peak, and that's consistent with the allowable height in the neighborhood business zoning district. The applicant proposes one floor plan and will provide several elevations for visual interest along the streetscape. Each unit will be 2 stories, approximately 1,826 square feet in size. Proposed setbacks are a minimum of 10 feet to the house and 20 feet to the garage, 0 feet on one side and 5 on the other, and a minimum 5-foot rear setback, although the majority of the lots do have a much greater setback in the rear than that. Go back. For single-family residential projects, a minimum of 250 square feet of open space is required to be provided as either private or common open space. Private open space in excess of 250 square feet is provided for each lot, primarily in the rear and side yard. To ensure that the final plan meets this requirement, staff is recommending a condition requiring the applicant provide an exhibit demonstrating compliance with this requirement at the time they submit the site improvement permit. Division 1.18 outlines 4 supplemental findings, 2 of which must be made in the affirmative in order to approve the special use permit, and staff has made findings A and B in the affirmative, and that's detailed in your staff report on page 17. The development standards also require a minimum 20-foot setback when adjacent to a residential zoning district, with an additional 10 feet for each story above 1 story, resulting in the required 30-foot setback along the southernmost property line. To the south, you do have residential zoning. However, the applicant is requesting a 20-foot setback here. The intent of this section is to protect the adjacent residential uses. The actual use on this adjacent property is a church. The church is set back approximately 77 feet from the shared property line. And with the 20-foot setback from the houses, you end up with a setback of approximately 97 feet between the residence and the existing church. The church is also buffered currently by that large setback and landscaping in the area, and you can see that here. The property line is approximately in the area of the row of trees. Staff is recommending a deed restriction requiring disclosure of the proximity of the existing church facility. The site is also constrained by the large NV Energy easement, which is located to the north and east of the project site. And while the easement is proposed to be abandoned and NV Energy has agreed to a partial abandonment of that, the entire easement can't be abandoned, so it does push the development a little bit further to the south. And finally, the applicant is also requesting a special use permit to allow for tandem parking pursuant to the newly adopted ordinance. The ordinance requires parking on both sides of internal and abutting streets within the boundaries of the development. They must provide guest parking at a ratio of 1 space per unit if on-street parking is not provided. Tandem spaces have to be provided exclusively for each lot. Each tandem space must be a minimum of 10 feet wide by 20 feet in length, excluding the width of the sidewalk. At least one tandem space must be enclosed in an enclosed and covered structure. And the minimum depth of each driveway must be a minimum of 20 feet excluding sidewalks. So for this project, parking is proposed to be provided with a 2-car tandem garage and driveway for each unit. Additionally, on-street parking on both sides of the road is provided in the development as well as adjacent to the development on Emerson Drive, which provides for additional parking for guests. The project has approximately 1,150 linear feet of curb, not counting the space for each driveway, and that provides approximately 63 on-street parking spaces at 18 feet per space. The garages will be a minimum internal width of 10 feet and internal depth of 41 feet, so they can provide parking for 2 vehicles, and driveways will be 20 feet, not counting sidewalks. The Planning Commission has the authority to approve special use permits and variance upon making all of the required findings of fact in the affirmative. The Board of Supervisors is authorized to approve the tentative subdivision map following recommendation from the Planning Commission. Staff has made all required findings in the affirmative as detailed in the staff report and is recommending approval of the project in its entirety, subject to the recommended conditions of approval. To date, there have been no public comments received by staff. The applicant, John Kropotkin, is here and may wish to give you a brief presentation. And with that, I'm available for questions.
The NV Energy easement, as I look at some of the plot plans and the site plans, it's not clear that NV Energy is completely on board yet with where the boundary lines are, because they're not really very clear. And I don't know if that's a question for the developer or for y'all, but it doesn't, I know we're talking about abandoning the easement on the north side and making it smaller so that the lots all fit, but it's not real clear in the documentation that I've seen that that's a done deal yet. Can you enlighten us on that?
Sure. Condition 19 on page 4 of the staff report talks about the NV Energy easement. And it states the partial abandonment of the NV Energy easement located in the northern and eastern portions of the site must be completed prior to issuing the site improvement permit. The abandonment shall result in an easement width satisfactory to NV Energy, and no portion of the resulting easement shall be located within any of the residential lots. The reason that there's no real firm width at this point is because NV Energy has some additional surveying that they need done to determine the exact width that they're willing to abandon. Based on what I understand from the applicant, last they discussed this with NV Energy, it was looking like 16 to 17 feet worth of that that was going to be abandoned. And they may be able to expand on that.
Questions for staff?
Okay, so I did reach out to the Transportation Department about not having a transportation study done because and correct me if I'm wrong, if my math is incorrect, but you've got 37 units, tandem parking, implying that each unit will have it minimally 2 cars, which would equate to 74 additional vehicles on that section of Emerson Drive. So, having said that, on my street, there are 12 houses on my street. there are 34 vehicles on my street. Of those 34 vehicles, 3 get parked in the garage. Everybody else's garages are full of stuff, and they are not parking their cars in their garages. So, and not to say that that's going to happen here, but it's possible. And if the driveway will only hold 1 car, which is what I'm seeing here, then the second car will be parked on the street or in the driveway or in the garage anyway. I just think that, tandem parking is fine as long as nobody's using their garage as a storage facility. When you have a lot as small as that, they're not going to be able to put a storage shed on to hold all their stuff. Number 4 on the findings, that it will not overburden the existing public services, including schools. We already know the schools are overburdened. And until and unless we start to figure out what we're going to do about that, I'm having a really hard time understanding how you arrive at the fact that there won't be any overburdening of the schools, considering they're already overburdened and without this development even being touched. So those are 2 of my concerns, is parking, 3 actually, parking, transportation, and overburdening the schools. Not to mention healthcare, but anyway.
Heather, the other thing in this document that it talks about the street, the city is not proposing to accept this street as a public street, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, because in the documentation from the developer, they're assuming, I think in their presentation, that initially it was going to be a public street.
Right, so we've been in discussions with the applicant from the beginning of this project regarding that. They're aware of staff's position.
Okay. Any other questions for staff?
Alex Doors for the record, Commissioner Doors for the record. The trees, you mentioned that they were around the property line. Do we have definitive, do we know that they're on the church's side of the property line?
I don't know if the applicant can clarify that. It's not clear to me based on aerial photography or going out to the site exactly which side of the line they're on. There would be fences and landscaping as a result of this development as well. So there would be some additional buffering resulting from this development.
I think it's just that's the line where they're talking about the variance, so I think it should be important, because if that's on the property line, the trees are gonna go. So they're not gonna be any sort of, there'll be a fence there, but just wanna be clear on that, so to be clear, we do not know if those trees are, which property those trees are on.
I am not certain. The applicant may be able to expand on that.
Understood.
There's also additional landscaping between those trees and the church. It's a little bit difficult to see at this scale, but there is additional landscaping there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Heather, could you just clarify for me, the NV Energy is saying that they're willing to abandon a portion of their easement as long as structures are not built in that easement, or what remains of the easement?
So the easement cannot be located within their, the lots at all. So what gets abandoned has to actually be outside of the boundaries of
Okay,
parcels.
so the map we're looking at may not be accurate in terms of the lot configuration based upon what may happen there after NV Energy decides where it wants to.
There may be some slight modifications. If they're large modifications, then they would have to come back through this process.
Well, it looks to me like on a number of those lots that the abandonment would have to be in excess of, well, probably around 20 feet. So if you take 20 feet off, that gives you approximately 50 feet in lot depth remaining.
So maybe the applicant can expand a little bit. They're the ones that have had more in-depth conversations with NV Energy. What's shown on the tentative map is the existing width of the easement.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
When you talk about landscaping, I have walked that lot numerous times, I mean, more than I can count. And what I see as far as landscaping is there's a bunch of low-lying, I think they're evergreens, you'll kind of shrubs. And that is the sum total extent of the landscaping that is along that northern boundary of that lot. And other than that, it's sagebrush.
Okay, there's also going to be landscaping required of this development as well, so there will be additional buffering. There is some trees as well intermixed throughout there. By no means did I claim that it was a full visual buffer.
Okay, I'm going to assume that there's going to be a homeowners association on this. And one of the things that I have a question on is once it gets settled with the NV Energy easement, would it be a condition of the NV Energy and the easement to have the HOA maintain the easement? Because we've got a couple of easements here. We've got the easement on the top, and then we have another easement that goes through to the detention basin, and it's south of the existing NV Energy substation, so I understand there probably would be an agreement on that. So I think that's something I'd like to have considered, is that the HOA would be responsible for maintaining those easements, so then that way we don't have a thing like that.
Well, what you want is the city not to be responsible.
The city not to be responsible, but to make it the obligation of the homeowners association to maintain those detention basins and the easement across the top so it doesn't encroach on that pathway.
Are there any other questions for staff?
Yeah. So is the detention basin to the north of the parking lot of Lone Mountain Vet, in between Lone Mountain Veterinary and the power substation? Is that where that detention basin is going to sit? Okay, so.
Yes, it's proposed to be in that
Okay.
location.
I have a question. What is the proposed setback on those northern lots right now? Is there any, I'm confused because it doesn't look like it's drawn with a setback that meets any requirements, especially after the abandonment goes through, if it goes through as we're talking about here. Is there a proposed, do we know that?
The minimum setback for the rear lots, or the rear yard setback, is 5 feet, which is consistent with the zoning district. The distance from the NV Energy easement, at this point, we don't have an exact number. Again, you guys might want to call the applicant up to speak to that specifically, since they've had multiple conversations with NV Energy.
All right, is the applicant here? Would you like to come address us, please? First of all, have you had a chance to review the conditions of all four of these items, and are they acceptable?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Borders, John Krompotnik, and Commissioners. We have looked at the staff report in great detail, worked with staff, lots of challenges here for 7 or 8 months now, getting to this point. We are in agreement with the conditions. We have I've spoken at length primarily with Stephen Pote about the private street thing. That was very concerning, came as a surprise because we're building a street to design and building a street to Carson City Public Works Design Manual standards and wanted to dedicate it because cities are in the business of maintaining and operating streets better than HOAs. I remember having a lighthearted conversation with staff about private streets. I said, I wouldn't buy a house on a private street because I have the trust in the public delivering that as a primary service, just like they do police and fire service. So I wanted to at least tee that up with the commission with hope that you guys would consider a public street as part of, getting rid of the private street requirement. That's what we were hopeful. Other than that, we're perfectly fine with the staff report and the conditions.
Can you shed some light on the NV
I'd
Energy
be glad
easement?
to. I also wanted to introduce Michael Fix. He's our civil engineer. He's been intimately involved in this. I think, let me ask you first, Mr. Chairman, would you like me to go through the slides? A lot of them are redundant to what Heather shared with the commission, but
If you would go through it and probably highlight some of our questions that you've already heard, it might be helpful.
I think I could just get to your questions because, actually, could you put the PowerPoint together? Thank you. Actually, go back to the one that shows the easement there. I think most of your questions were directed at the NV Energy easement. So what I think is important for the commission to know, and this is done with a lot of precision, right? We met with the principal transmission engineer at NV Energy. They dictated to us what is acceptable. Our plan reflects the easement of which, that width that they need. So there's a partial abandonment of the easement, our property line, in no way, shape, or form, and this is done with, CAD level precision in civil engineering. Our rear property line reflects the easement as they have demanded it be. We don't have the exact survey done yet because they're going to do surveying with their survey team internally. But we do have that done. That's what's shown
So you're
on the
saying
plan.
that the drawings that we have reflect what you think your agreement with NV Energy is?
There's no question, because
Okay.
this thing is very tight, there's not a lot of wiggle room in it, you can see how it all relates, all the property lines, houses, streets, and so on. And so that involves the wraparound as well over to the east. That plan is done in an engineering drawing to reflect their standard, their requirement. The other thing, you can see the trees there on the north. Obviously, this is an interest in having a nice project, is that we wanted that screen there. So it's going to be, the kind of isolated from the easement visually. You'll have a 6-yard property line fence back there, again, on the north and on the east as it relates to the transformer station.
Can you discuss the property line to the south and the
20-foot
location of those trees?
Yes, those trees, go ahead, Michael.
Mike Vicks, Monte Vista sorry.
Green light.
Gotcha. Mike Vicks, Monte Vista Consulting. I just pulled up the survey that we received for our design, and those existing trees that Heather had in her presentation are on the adjacent property. So they will remain with the proposed development. And so that screening will not go away. And I can share that with you at phone scale if you'd like.
No, that's fine. I think that answers your question.
Thank you.
Anything else for the developer? I have one question. If you
Yeah, please.
advance that slideshow to that's it. Is that like an 8-foot garage?
That is, our driveway is actually 11 feet wide.
No, height, garage height.
Oh, the garage height, I don't know what the height is.
It looks like about an 8-footer. It's an 8-foot door. Yeah, 7 foot. And the only question I'm leading up to is tandem parking is fine, you park one car in there. There's no way you can get a pickup truck in there. You'll have a hard time putting a big pickup truck in there right now.
Go ahead.
Definitely. I have a big pickup truck and I can get it in a 7-foot door. It's snug. We got a little bit, but it can be done. The width on the garage door, I believe, is it 9-foot doors we were discussing?
9-foot doors, 11-foot garage, 11-foot, 10-foot,
Well,
8-inch driveway.
Yeah, I understand the
is
width. I'm
usually
talking about the
more-
height.
Yeah, so.
You know,
As long as it's not a lifted truck, I think you should be able to make it happen, honestly.
Okay.
Based on my experience, so.
You have two roadway cross-sections. Which one are you proposing to utilize in this project?
We're proposing to use both. So the proposed roadway section, we have the special section, which is what we're utilizing within the development. And then the other roadway section we call out is for the improvements along Emerson Drive. And so we're actually widening Emerson to conform with the conditions of approval to provide parking on both sides along with a bike lane. And so that's why we have both roadway sections. Emerson Drive will be the highlighted section in the urban road sections detail, I believe it was. And then the interior driveway will be the special section.
This is directed to the city. Is the special section, are you okay with that?
Stephen Potato, Development Engineering. Yeah, that's one of our standard street sections for this type of infill development. So,
Okay, thank you.
And I think the last question we had was about the HOA and the maintenance of the easement.
Yeah, we have.
I know you haven't drafted your documents yet, but did you have an idea about what you wanted to do with that?
I think there were a couple parts to the question on the HOA easement, right? Certainly the one that relates to the project. Can you go to the image that shows the overall? Thank you, Heather. So you can see the detention basin. We got that little throat that kicks off the public street, private street, Crimson Circle. And then that's the access. So that would be the portion that would be our responsibility, obviously, right? HOA maintained, pretty typical. We have no permission to go to NV Energy. They're going to be isolated. They have their own access to the transformer. And there would be just no reason to even ask the question, right? I think they're going to want to keep people away from there, want an HOA away from there, and they have complete control of their domain. That would be the idea there.
Would you go ahead and gate that easement?
Yes, that one in the little throat there, you see,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
that would be gated. That's
That would be
correct.
gated so
Yes.
that they could have access, but it's not generally a public.
That's exactly right. That's what we've talked about, yes.
Okay. There any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Heather? Do you want to proceed with public comment per item now, or just public comment in general?
I would suggest taking public comment on all 4 items
Okay,
together.
all right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And your one item of contention is the street, correct? Whether or not it belongs to you or us? All right, hang on for that.
Would you like to get more into it? I mean, we did some analysis about how much this adds to the street inventory, about the cost. We actually hired a fiscal expert to look at this having to make sense for the city, so we have some of that to discuss if you want to get into it. Thank you.
Let's get through some of the other first. Okay. All right. There's public comment at this time. If anyone in the audience would like to comment on this project in any one of the 4 items that we've been discussing, which is the variance, the tandem parking, the plan itself, and the zoning.
Thank you, Vice Chair and Commission. Denny French for record. I've relaxed a little bit. Hopefully I'll keep this condensed. I'm concerned that every time they're adding to the bike, what they call the bike route next to this freeway, they're really cutting off any view by the structures that they put on the south sides. So you've got the freeway on the north side, so that really cuts off your ability to see squat, and then, see property or landscape. And then to do the same to the south side would be just a double whammy. I haven't really understood where the fence lines and such would be maintained by NV Electric, what would be considered the fence areas by the city, and then on the area that they're talking about, the drainage area to the right there, to the east. Those type of considerations are important to me because that's what I'm going to see as I'm going down that particular bike path and those type of things, those considerations as far as being trash bin or weed developments. And we've got some of that going already, more to the southern direction. You leave the area near Home Depot and head off that way where I can walk and where I can't as far as thorns or other issues if I'm off path. And just not a very appreciated area, I think, because of some of it just doesn't give you that look or view that's comfortable to walk in. So I don't want that to happen there. The areas to the west are fairly sheltered. You don't get a whole lot of view from there. You have to get at either end of that area to be able to see anything. So I'm just concerned about that, and if those questions could be addressed, I'd appreciate it. I've got a little pointer thing, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I haven't really understood where you're talking about with certain little open ways. I'm sort of thinking that near the basins there, that tan area that's between the houses that's not related to the street, that's the area that you're talking about. That road would be fenced off and only accessible through NV Electric to their electric units there, or how's that? Could someone clarify that for me?
We'll answer your questions later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is there anyone else has comment that'd like, please come forward. Excuse me, go ahead and sign in, please, and make sure that your green light is on before you speak. One of you can start if the other wants to write second.
I'm Mike Honpa and Robin Grayshield. We represent the three congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses that meet at the hall to the south. And so we wanted to just address a couple of the things. First off, on the variance, we don't, in principle, have any objection to that lessening of the variance. Our biggest concern as far as bordering is that there be proper fencing between there. One of our big concerns is obviously public safety and it already is something where it's people cut through on their way to Walmart or whatever. And with an addition of 37 homes and the additional residents, we certainly, it increases, if it's pretty easy to cut across our parking lot, it increases our liability as well as, the ability to protect people from tripping and that sort of thing. So that would be probably our largest concern on this whole project. Everything else, it appears that they've done what they need to do as far as, that it was our understanding as well that those trees are on our property and we maintain them and, we've had to replace them to keep ourselves within the bounds of what the city requires. So anyhow, that was our biggest concern.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. And as far as a barrier, perhaps one of our questions would be what type of barrier they would put between the Kingdom Hall and the existing homes.
Okay,
Sir, can you say your name for the record?
Robin Grayshield.
all right. We will answer your questions, but is there any other public comment at this time? Okay. Heather, would you like to take a whack at those?
So.
I believe the fencing issue is that there's a 6-foot
6-foot privacy fence.
privacy fence that'll go up there,
Be in the rear yards of the
a
home.
concrete block fence, so that whole borderline between the church parking lot and the development will be a 6-foot cinder block fence, so.
It's 6-foot privacy.
Privacy,
fence.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
privacy fence.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So the other question that Denny had was I believe he was concerned with the location of the roadway, the maintenance road for NV Energy. And I don't know if you can see my cursor. Oops. The general location is right there. And that would be fenced off to prevent folks from accessing NV Energy substation.
There's no more comment. Yeah, I would like for have staff give us some reading, first of all, on the advantages and disadvantages of accepting that roadway, since that seems to be an issue with the developer, so.
Stephen Potet, Development Engineering. So the direction that staff has gotten from the city manager and also speaking with some of the board members is that just based on our funding, that it's not prudent to accept roads that only benefit the subdivision in question. So for instance, we recently saw another one that connected on all sides, and those were public because we assumed that traffic would be passing through, versus on this one, since the street doesn't connect to anything besides those homes, the assumption is that it's only benefiting that subdivision. So the thought process is to put the burden on that subdivision.
Okay. Do you have a question?
Excuse me. I want a little clarification on the setbacks on the north side. In staff's report, the north surrounding zoning is single family, 6,000. But when I asked before, you said it was that the 5-foot setback is, normal for the surrounding zoning. But it doesn't seem that would be normal. Does I-580 being there affect that, or? Okay.
Yes, it does.
So can
So
we just
the
get
setback's
clarification?
actually measured from the center line of the road in that case.
The center line of I-580 of the road?
Yeah. So you get that extra buffer because the road is actually between you and any additional.
Okay.
Any other comments?
For Stephen, if the city isn't going to take the road, could they build to a lesser standard than the special section?
The special section is actually one that we require to be privately owned currently and maintained. When the city's going to be maintaining streets, we typically require that standard urban street section, which is wider. And when you're maintaining it, it's easier to do traffic control and move construction equipment around.
Okay, thank you.
Not a question, just more than a statement, is that I've managed numerous homeowners associations, actually hundreds of homeowners associations over the years. And I had private roads in those homeowners associations. And they benefited, in this particular thing, they are benefiting those owners that are right there. And the way that I look at it is not only is it an ingress egress only for those owners, it's going to benefit them for the additional parking by its doing these tandem garages, these shorter setbacks and so forth. So I agree with the city on this wholeheartedly.
Plus the fact they could gate it if they wanted to. Any other questions for staff? Developer? Comments?
Actually, I have another question.
All right.
Or maybe just an observation. According to the developer's materials, there's 3.2 acres of developable land within this project, because you got to take the roads out, you got to take the easements out. That, if it were single-family 6,000, which are all the adjacent properties there, then that would only allow 23 units. And I understand that neighborhood business allows for a maximum density of 30-some-odd units per acre. But I'm having a problem with the variance based upon the fact that they're getting an extra privilege that other residents in the neighborhood do not get by allowing the variance. And I guess that's just my comment.
A little slow.
They have 37 units.
Correct.
In this project. Typically, if it were zoned single-family, 6,000 square foot, they could get 23 units. We're giving them a variance so that they can get those 37 units on there, which is more than any of the neighboring properties could achieve, given the existing zoning. And we're not denying them the use of the property,
The variance is for the setback.
for the setback, exactly, but they can't achieve the 37 units without that setback. They can't achieve the proposed subdivision without.
I see what you're saying.
Without
Okay.
the setback.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to address that, but I also wanted to put the gentleman at ease that came up on the concern about fencing. We also have the same concern, right? So it's not concrete because that has not very much of a community feel, right? 6-foot privacy fencing, a typical standard is wood. That has a nice feel for the abutting property, but that is a commitment we're making. If I could add a condition to work with them, I would. I know you guys can't do that, or the public process doesn't allow that to, but I just want you to know that we're gonna do whatever it takes to make it right with them, including additional trees if they wanted them on the south property line of those houses. You see our plan, well, it's not shown on this one. Our concern with screening was more about, screening the freeway and the NV Energy easement, and there's power lines and such. And so from all measures in community planning, that relationship to the Jehovah's Witness Church is very generous setback and a completely compatible type of thing. And I wanted to touch on Commissioner Eswine's concern about that setback. The single biggest rear yard setback we have in the property is that setback, even though it's 20 feet. As staff pointed out, the intent of the code was for something different. So we're not stuffing them in there. It's definitely tight, right? And without the 20 feet, we lose a bank of houses. And then the project goes away. So it becomes very critical in the case of the spatial relationships we're dealing with in this particular subdivision to have that 20 feet. But I hope the commission sees the validity of it because, as staff pointed out, the intent of this section is to protect adjacent residential. In this case, it's residential that you're buying into, adjacent to a church that happens to be 77 feet away, so almost 100 feet between structures. With a 26-foot tall house adjacent to that, it just seems like we've picked it apart hard, and it's a very responsible way to look at that land use relationship. So I just wanted to share that. I take any other questions you have too, and if you want me to elaborate on the fencing, I just promise you that we're here to work with that abutting property owners and do whatever it takes to make that happen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
I want to speak to the variance, and I agree with what Commissioner Eswine said. He's correct. If the variance weren't there, this project would not look like it does. That's a true statement. I've often said the staff doesn't support variances. It's a very high bar, and you rarely see these because they rarely make their way to you because it is rare that the staff is willing to support them. So I want to be very clear on that point. You have 3 findings when you consider a variance. The first is special circumstances. So what do the rules say? The rules tell us that if you're going to develop on non-residentially zoned land for a residential purpose, you have to have an extra setback. So instead of a 20-foot setback, you have to have a 30-foot setback because the house is taller if it's adjacent to residential zoning. Okay, so let's think about this. If you're building next to residential zoning, you get an extra big setback. Why? Well, one would think you're protecting those people who live there. In this case, we don't have people who live there. We have a non-residential use. So because there's a non-residential use next door, albeit zoned residential, staff found that that was unusual. That's a different creature, right? Maybe this really doesn't make sense in this case because you have a church, you don't have houses. We're not protecting residents. You have a parking lot and you have the church building 70 feet away. Then we have to say, is it necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights? That's arguable. And I think that's what Commissioner Eswine was getting to, is there are good property rights. They have the ability to build, just not as many units as they want. Staff did feel there were a lot of constraints on this property. When you look at a property, when you consider a variance, you're considering the land itself, not necessarily the project. This one, you have this NV Energy easement, which we've talked about a lot. You have a substation. You have, the church isn't really a constraint, but you do have those easements. So we felt there was a constraint. And will the granting of this application it will not adversely impact health, safety, and welfare, essentially, is our third finding. And we did not believe it would. So, but I think the focal point for the staff, and again, it is rare that you ever even see a variance because the bar is so high, is the fact that the neighbor was a church as opposed to residential. And the whole point of having an extra large setback when you're adjacent to residential zoning seems to be to protect the people who live next door, and nobody lives next door. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
All right. In the order of things, if there's no further discussion, or if there is, we need to consider, I think, the variance first.
I would suggest taking it in the order that it's in the staff report.
No, I think the order in the staff report is wrong. I think the order in the agenda is correct.
Okay.
Because if we don't approve the variance, then we can't approve the tentative map, and we can't have 37 units.
You can go ahead and do the variance.
Whatever,
Okay.
whatever you prefer.
All right.
If you, likewise, if you don't approve the first SUP listed,
Correct.
you can't approve
Correct.
the rest of it.
Correct.
So whatever is the pleasure of the commission.
Well,
You're the chair.
I'm the chair. I think I'm right, too. All right. So the first issue would be the variance. Is there any further discussion, or somebody make a motion? Okay.
All right, no. It's always fun to do 4. Okay, I move to approve variance number 2019-003 based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second? Second. All right. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
All
And the
right.
reason I vote no is item 3 and 4 of the findings, which may not have any relevance to the variance, but will have little or no detrimental effect on vehicular or pedestrian traffic, which I don't think that's been proven, and I don't think it's been proven that it will not overburden the existing public services facilities, including schools. Oh, sorry. I vote no.
Commissioner Doors, did you vote?
I did, I voted yay.
Yay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Went yay.
Commissioner Tingle, Your comments will not be on the record.
Would
Do
you like me
want-
to repeat them? I'm more than happy to.
Would you like them on the record? If you do.
I would.
Okay, then please do.
Commissioner Tingle, you're referring to the findings for a special use permit, not the findings for a variance.
And I understand that, but because the variance is, if the variance is not approved, then all of the rest of it is moot. So the variance has been approved, so do we have to go?
4-2.
So,
Sorry, Commissioner Eswine and Commissioner Tingle as no votes.
Yes, I'm sorry. The vote is 4-2 in favor.
okay, so do I get to comment or do I have to wait? Oh, yay. I voted no based on number 3. Will have little or no detrimental effect on vehicular or pedestrian traffic because I don't believe that's been proven as a traffic study was not warranted because it did not meet the threshold. I voted no based on item number 4, which said it will not overburden existing public services facilities, including schools, which we already know is, the schools are overburdened. So in good conscience, I cannot vote yes on this project because we're already overburdened in that area. And that's my no vote.
Okay. And the motion carried 4-2. The second motion I would like to consider is to approve special use permit 2019-0000000166 based on the ability to find the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval. That's the SUP that determines that we can have 37 units in a neighborhood business development. Is there a second?
Do we have a motion?
No, I just made the motion.
you made the motion.
I made the motion. That. All right, is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries 6-0. Number 3 is, I would like to move to approve LU 2019-0080 based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval. And that is for the tandem parking. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Is there any further discussion on tandem parking? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries 6-0. And finally, let's see. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors the approval of the tentative subdivision map, 2019-00000165, based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval. This is the tentative map for the 37-unit single-family lots on 5.5 acre parcel zone neighborhood business, known as the Emerson Townhomes, with all the conditions that were stated in the staff report. Is there a second on? Second. Any further discussion on that item? All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
No.
All right.
I would, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say that even though I voted against the variance, I think that this is a good project.
Okay.
Yes.
I have like a 2-minute delay.
Oh.
The next item on the agenda is number 5, LU 2019-0078. Discuss and possible action regarding the request for a special use permit for a multifamily apartment complex on property zoned general commercial and multifamily apartment specific plan area, MFA SPA, located at 3679 and 3689 Gordon Street, 1630, 1636, and 1650 Brown Street, APN 008-30315-1621, 36, 37, and 39. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant is requesting a special use permit for a residential use in a non-residential zoning district. As you can see on the slide, the site's comprised of 6 lots yielding 2.78 acres. The 3 western lots are zoned general commercial. The eastern lots are zoned multifamily apartment, specific plan area. The applicant is proposing to construct 81 units in 5 buildings with access off of Brown Street. The Brown Street specific plan area is one of 4 specific plan areas in the master plan. The commission spent a lot of time with the Lampa Ranch specific plan. So you haven't spent a lot of time with the Brown Street specific plan. But the other specific plans that are in the master plan, and again, there's only 4, are the Schultz Ranch specific plan, the Lampa Ranch specific plan, the Eastern Portal, Virginia and Truckee Railroad Gateway specific plan, and the Brown Street specific plan. The Brown Street specific plan is to establish policies that reinforce and stabilize the area as a cohesive residential neighborhood. The staff report addresses the various policies associated with this specific plan. The applicant has built other apartment buildings in the area, and he's proposing to utilize an architectural design that's similar to those buildings, including stucco siding, cultured stone wainscot on the entryways, and a timberline high-definition shingles on the roof. As the commission knows, when you consider a special use permit, you're considering the 7 findings of fact. I'd like to speak to 3 of those findings. Finding number 1 talks about consistency with the master plan. As I have already mentioned, the Brown Street specific plan, or this is in the Brown Street specific plan. As you go through those policies, you'll see the policies are to create a pedestrian-friendly street with frontages that include front doors facing the street, parking in the rear, sidewalks along the roads, and street trees. The proposed project will comply with these requirements either as proposed or as conditioned. Specific Plan Policy 4.1 talks about water and sewer will be upgraded as needed to serve future development. The sewer lift station is at capacity with the entitled project, so the staff has recommended that the applicant enter into a development agreement to pay its pro rata share based on a contribution of 10,530 gallons per day. The Specific Plan Policy 4.2 talks about drainage facilities, including downstream facilities that serve the area will need to be upgraded as needed to serve future development. The staff recommends that prior to issuance of construction permits, the applicant enter into a development agreement to pay its pro rata share for the regional storm drain improvements to satisfy this finding. Finding 4 talks about overburdened existing public facilities and services. I've already spoken about the sewer lift station being at capacity and needing to be upgraded, as well as the issue with the stormwater, and the staff has recommended payment of a pro rata share for each of those utilities, if you will. We also, every time we talk about residential development, we talk about the school district. So again, the school district is concerned about continued growth. They have not recommended mitigations. Finding 5 talks about whether or not the project meets the definition of the standards in the title. So essentially, does it comply with all the zoning and all the rules in our rule book? This project does not meet the setback on the eastern property line where it's adjacent to the home, and I'll point that out. It's essentially in this area. They provided 15 feet when they need 20 feet. However, there's an access easement along the western property line, which again, this was 6 properties, many of them landlocked. So there was an access easement to ensure access to these properties. These properties will be merged prior to construction, and the access easement will no longer be necessary. So I've included a condition of approval that the access easement does need to be vacated, and it actually needs to be vacated because there's parking in it. You can't drive if there's cars parked there. So those 2 uses are not consistent with each other. We believe the access easement is not necessary with the merger of the properties. Once the access easement is abandoned, the applicant can simply shift that, those 2 buildings, there are actually 1 on each end, farther towards the storage unit to the west and meet the setbacks. That's why I have brought this forward to you, because I think it's an easy solution, and the applicant agrees that that's a reasonable solution. The code also requires 250 square feet of open space per unit, or 20,250 square feet. The applicant has indicated that they have 23,595 square feet of open space. The staff has included a condition of approval requesting a detailed diagram with the site improvement permit demonstrating compliance with the specific requirements of the open space requirements for residential development in a non-residential zoning district. So I just wanted to highlight those 3 findings for you. With the conditions of approval recommended by staff, we believe the findings can be made, and we are recommending approval. Dwight Millard, the applicant, is present, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions for staff?
I don't have a question, I have a comment. As the Planning Commission body, we should not be putting the onus on the school district to figure out a way to mitigate overcrowding. As a Planning Commission, we should always take that issue into consideration when we are looking at development. And so that is where I come from when I am making comment about the current school overcrowding, that it should not be up to Superintendent Stokes to come to us with solutions to school overcrowding issues, that we need to be taking that into consideration whenever we look at any development.
But by the same token, the school district is doing their own due diligence, and they have yet to come to us and say, we need a moratorium or we need to slow down development because we can't meet the demand.
Do you seriously think they would ever say that?
Yes,
They have.
they have.
For the record, Commissioner Doors, I've been approached and heard what you're saying, they've told me, people from the school district. So I think they are a little more concerned than they are bureaucratically able to convey.
Well, but I still don't believe it's a position of this body to issue a moratorium on development in the community of Carson City.
I agree. I think to speak on this subject, I think it is very important for us to be concerned with it. I think that it is the school districts and the the school district's responsibility to provide schooling for building. And I think that if we do get a little bit too into not approving developments because our current education system or education availability won't sustain it, I think we really sacrifice growth, which is a big problem. I agree with you, Ms. Tingle. I think it's important to look at both sides, but I think that as a planning commission body, the education department does have a responsibility to catch up. And I think it's a fair thing to balance, to be the devil's advocate, sorry.
Okay, back on topic. Do any further questions with staff?
Yes.
All right. Commissioner.
I'm not sure who to address this to, but the staff report indicates that the fire department doesn't have a problem with this as long as they meet the fire codes. But is a single entrance for 80 units appropriate?
I had the same question, and actually I had Dave Rubin, the fire marshal, in my office with the site plan open, and I said, are you going to be okay with this? It's actually 100 units is the trigger for a secondary access, and fire's okay with this as designed. So I did make that extra outreach.
Thank you. And another question is when the condition is for half-street improvements, I'm assuming that that's just the property frontage on Brown Street.
Stephen Potato, Development Engineering, that's correct. It's the frontage on Brown Street.
Any other questions for staff about the developer? Have y'all read the recommendations for approval, and do you have any problems with them?
No.
Green
No,
light.
sir. For the record, Dwight Millard, Harold Morris from Morris Engineering. No, we don't, with the exception that we've been asked to enter into an agreement, and we don't know what that agreement is, but it's certainly codified, and we're willing to enter into that agreement on the lift station. and the storm drainage.
Okay. Any questions for the developer? Okay, thank you, sir. Is there any public comment on this issue? Green light.
Perfect. All right, I have a green light. Thank you very much. My name is Linda Buchanan. I am the founder and executive director of Kathmandu. We are a facility located on Brown Street, and I am very intimately acquainted with that area of town, and I have some very grave concerns that I have not heard addressed about this project. First and foremost is the transportation issue. Brown Street currently is a fairly narrow street, and large sections of it do not currently have sidewalks. It does not have street drainage. It's a racetrack, pretty much. People go speeding up and down that street, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. And there are already people walking along the side of the street that are in danger. There's animals crossing the street that are in danger. I do fear what another 162 potential vehicles going up and down that small street every day is going to do. Secondly, there are a number of accidents that happen on a regular basis there at the intersection of Highway 50 and Brown Street, as you have people turning onto Brown Street and you have people coming from Brown Street, especially trying to cross Highway 50. There's frequently accidents there. There's near misses all the time, and I'm very concerned what is going to happen with all the additional traffic there. I've personally been involved and almost hit a number of times there at Gordon and Brown Street by people already running that stop sign. So those are a couple of very big issues that I have. I'm also very concerned about the stormwater issue. Currently, that whole section, I understand the developer is going to do this, that, and the other, but Brown Street right now has very little drainage, and the majority of the drainage comes down Brown Street and all funnels into this one little grate that's there by my property. And every time it rains, I'm out there with a rake trying to get all of the debris and all of the leaves out, because otherwise it just floods the whole area. And once you pave over that field, that field currently absorbs a lot of moisture. So once you pave that field over, because you're putting houses and parking lots, you're going to have all that additional runoff to contend with. And I'm wondering where it's going to go, because right now when it rains, that whole area really floods badly. I am also concerned about the amount of parking that they are going to provide. Currently, a Millard development is right next door to Kathmandu, and we have people parking up and down all across the street in front of the fire hydrants, because, people have more cars than there's generally parking for, and I'm concerned that if you don't have enough parking for that development, you're going to have more people parking along the side of the road on Brown Street, which is going to narrow it even more. So then it's going to increase the transportation, the risk to pedestrians, the number of accidents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Please sign in.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Denny French, I would have started my statement by suggesting we don't develop anywhere until we can cover what we have, but I restrained myself. The situation for me with this particular project is a concern that hasn't been addressed as well as what was just spoken by Linda. The deal is that it looks like a racetrack, which is with one exit, and are we going to consider that a private community and therefore allow them to be responsible for their own streets or their variances or their setbacks in conjunction with the requirements that we put on other developments? And if so, why am I not seeing that here? I'm just not reading it quite like I think I'm supposed to. And so to me, it's one exit, might as well be a gated community. Let them take care of their own roads. That would help us out a bit. And that's about it on my comments. Thank you very much.
Are there any other public comments at this time? Hope, would you like to give it?
Okay, I'll
shot at
start
those?
with Ms. Buchanan. On the transportation, sidewalk, and street drainage, I'll just point out to the commission, condition of approval 19B requires that the project must install half-street improvements, including curb, gutter, sidewalk, and half-street paving. So there will be a requirement for a sidewalk, albeit on the frontage of this property. He's not required to put in a sidewalk off-site. And so these improvements will be just in front of this property. In terms of parking, or I guess storm drain, I want to talk about condition 15. Condition 15 will require that prior to the issuance of a site improvement permit, the project must enter into a development agreement, which you heard Mr. Millard say, but I haven't seen the development agreement because he hasn't, it's not drafted yet. But that will require that he pay his pro rata share for regional storm drainage improvements to satisfy parts of the specific plan. Now, the city does have some data on the drainage from a regional flood study that's currently underway in the area, and they'll assist. So we do recognize, the staff recognizes, and in fact, this specific plan recognizes drainage is an issue here. And if any of you had a chance to drive on Edmonds, well, not Edmonds, I'm sorry, the street that's parallel to Brown that begins with an E. Edmonds, okay, sorry. All of a sudden I blanked and thought I was wrong. You'll see the most recent apartment building that Mr. Millard built, and you'll see that it's rocked in front, and the drainage that was involved there, where he had to work with the city staff and try to address the drainage concerns. It was challenging. So we recognize that drainage is a big issue, which is why this condition is in here, because it will need to be addressed. In terms of Denny's questions about the streets, there are no streets. There's no subdivision of land as part of this proposal. It's an apartment complex. So in fact, 6 lots will become 1 lot. And it will be a parking lot with a driveway, and it will all be privately maintained. It won't be publicly maintained. You want to speak to 50 at Brown? Sure.
Stephen with Development Engineering for the record. So a couple other topics that were brought up were accidents at 50 and Brown. And on this project, I sat with the Transportation Department, and we talked about whether or not to require a traffic impact study because it doesn't meet the volume thresholds. And it didn't make sense to require a traffic signal at any of the adjacent intersections since there's one existing there at Fairview and 50. And they did not bring up any concerns with crash data, which they do keep track of. So I'm not sure if that's something that was outside of their radar, or if the incidents that have been observed there by Kathmandu are I don't know, small compared to what they're used to seeing at other intersections. I don't know. Then also on speeding, I will notify the Transportation Department. Typically in that situation, what they do is they send out the sheriff's office, and they'll look and see how big of an issue it is, if any mitigation is needed for speeding.
Okay. Yeah, there's no other public comments. Is there any comments from the staff, from the commission? Okay.
I just kind of wanted to clarify on something we talked about earlier, because generally Commissioner Tingle and I are somewhat in line on the education thing. I think this project is a perfect use of land for this area of town, which is where I come from in saying, you know, I think that the education, the school district has some culpability and responsibility in doing whatever they have to do, be it going back to the drawing board or whatever, in order to provide schooling for kids. I don't feel like we're approving a project like we approved last month, or tentatively approved last month, where we're shoving a bunch of stuff into a part of town where it doesn't belong. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, for the record. And I think this fits in this part of town. And so the city does have some responsibility to accommodate growth and building on an individual's property. So that was just to clarify some comments that were made earlier.
Thank you very much. Does that mean you're ready for a motion?
This commissioner's ready for a motion.
Go
I
ahead.
can't even make it.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Doers, I move to recommend approval of LU-2019-0078 based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
there a second? No. Second by Commissioner Eswine. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Did you vote yes or no?
I voted yes. Holy
Okay.
cow.
6-0. Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to point out, thank you, Dwight, for bringing in some affordable housing into this area because most of the stuff we see is luxury, and not everybody can afford luxury, so thank you.
For your question, I wish it was affordable.
Work on it.
All right, moving forward, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is E6 for possible action, discovering possible action regarding a request for a special use permit for a multifamily apartment complex and commercial space on property zoned retail commercial at 1421 North Carson Street, APN 002-136-01. Hope.
Thank you. This is a request for a special use permit for residential use in a non-residential zoning district. The applicant is proposing to demolish the Back on Track Hotel and construct 2 apartment buildings yielding 36 units and 2 commercial buildings fronting on Carson Street yielding 3,008 square feet. Access will be from East Park Street and from East Adams Street. The 3-story apartment building will have a height of 30 feet and utilize stucco with cement board trim. Balconies will have a painted metal railing, and the roofing will be composite shingle. The apartments are intended to house people in a job training program while they learn skills. The residents will be assessed and coached to find the best suited career paths. Given this targeted clientele, the applicant does not anticipate residents will have cars. Also, Fish, who's the applicant, has indicated that they will provide a shuttle to transport residents to their classes. Given this, Fish is proposing 39 on-site parking spaces. Staff is supportive of the reduced parking, subject to a development agreement. We understand what Fish is seeking to do. We understand the clientele they're targeting in this program and that it is indeed a program. So given that, we do believe that there really won't be that many vehicles because their residents won't be able to afford them, and there will be the shuttle to take the residents to their classes up at the college. The staff would ask that the development agreement obligate the applicant to operating this program as described and providing the shuttle for a period of 10 years. As you know, when you consider a special use permit, you're considering 7 findings of fact. I want to speak to one of the findings, and that's finding number 5, which states it meets the definition specific standards set forth in the zoning ordinance. The project before you does not comply with the landscape standards, and it's questionable if it complies with the open space standards. So staff is recommending that at the time of site improvement permit, the applicant demonstrate compliance with these provisions prior to the issuance of any site improvement permit. Also, the architecture of the commercial buildings has been provided in your packet. Staff's not certain if that's a placeholder or if that's indeed what they'll look like. Staff does not find that those are consistent with the architectural design standards found in section 1.1, which this commission just reviewed at your workshop. And so I would suggest that they, at the time they're seeking to construct the commercial buildings, that they modify the design to ensure they do comply with our architectural standards. With that, staff is recommending, or staff was able to make all 7 findings in the affirmative, subject to the conditions of approval, and we are recommending approval. Jim Peckham is here on behalf of Fish, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Hope, your condition number 19. Can you read that without choking? I'm not sure I understand what it means. I'm not sure what a sealed trip generation memo is.
This is Stephen Poteo.
Oh, it's from Stephen.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So the seal is referring to an engineer's stamp. So it's a seal from a traffic engineer, a sealed memo stating what the trip generation is.
Okay.
But the intent of that condition is looking at the overall project rather than piecemeal. So you don't have the apartments come in and then other generators and say it's not going to trigger a traffic impact study. We want to look at the whole project as
Well,
it comes in.
there's got to be an easier way to write this, because this is very confusing. I'm not sure I would sign up for that. And as long as I've got you, what about this number 18 where we abandon, is that the entry that's there now that's going to have a building in front of it? Is that why we're doing that?
That's correct.
Okay. The only other concern I have for this project is waste management. I don't see a dumpster pad, and I don't see how a truck can get into it. Is there did staff look at that, or is that a good question for the applicant?
Staff did look at that because I'm always looking for dumpsters, and I believe what I have on the screen, that white, I can't find my cursor, but along the eastern property line, sort of in the southern part, you'll see a white box with some gates. I believe that's the dumpster, and I will let the applicant speak to the adequacy of it.
Are there any other questions for
Yes,
staff?
Yes.
Commissioner Eswan.
This is just an observation on conditions 21 and 22. And now I got to remember what it was that my concern was, but it would seem to me that we want to make sure that we are, or maybe there should be some language in there to ensure that we are paying an appropriate share, not just reimburse them for whatever, because they could do, they could go to a high bidder and wouldn't be something that the city would necessarily do.
Stephen Poteo, Development Engineering. So yeah, when we are reviewing that agreement, the city engineer will also be reviewing that, and we've got a lot of data from other water main and sewer main projects that we can look at to see if the costs that they're proposing are fair.
Yeah, I'm just concerned, and I'm sure that you will do that. I'm just concerned that the language in the condition doesn't really state that, and you might want to modify it.
Are there any other questions for staff? Comment.
Fasten your seatbelt. No, I believe that this is a excellent project and one that I feel is going to be beneficial to the community, because I do feel very strongly that we need to focus on this particular demographic more maybe than what we do. So I am very appreciative of this proposal and am strongly in favor of it.
I have a question for staff. How many units are currently at the motel?
Sorry, I didn't come prepared to answer that, but I suspect the applicant will know that answer.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, regarding the 10 years of the shuttle service, why 10 years? Why not in perpetuity? Why not 5 years? What was staff's agreement to that from? Where'd that come from?
It seemed like a significant enough amount of time to allow conditions to change. It wasn't so short that conditions wouldn't change. So there isn't something I can point to explain to you why I picked 10 years. I just wanted something that had enough longevity to allow this to live its life. And then if there was a redevelopment contemplated in 10 years, that's fine, but not to be overly burdensome. If the commission feels a different time frame makes better sense, that's fine.
My only concern would be, after 10 years, do we review it? Or?
I was just thinking, after 10 years, a lot changes.
Well, one of the rationale I'm using is we're talking about less parking requirements, because this property is like Richards Crossing and some others, and I agree with that logic. But if this property ever changes hands, then how do we get back to the parking or the what it should be?
Understood. What's before you is a request for a residential use in a non-residential zoning district. This residential use will have a parking demand. Typically, the parking demand would be two parking spaces per unit. They've come in with something significantly less than that. They're saying, but our tenants don't need the parking, and we're going to have a shuttle, and we're going to get them to where they need to be. Okay, so all that makes sense. So how do we get there? How do we get to yes? The only way I can think to get to yes is through a development agreement that obligates them to those very things they said they would do. But then the question comes up, and you're exactly right, and there's people in the audience who have asked these very same questions of me. Well, what happens at the end of 10 years? First of all, let's not worry about if the property sells. The development agreement will apply to successors and interest. So what we have to worry about is what happens in 10 years. So in 10 years, basically, we have some dwelling units, 36 of them, with insufficient parking. And that's what you would have. And if that's not acceptable and the findings can't be met, then the findings can't be met. The best I could come up with was the development agreement to obligate the programming that's being contemplated.
All right. Any other questions for staff?
Well, just to kind of
Dawes?
talk a little further on that, with the development agreement carrying through to any potential buyers, I mean, I understand that Fish is a pretty substantial entity around Carson, but if something happens and they want to sell it or they shut down or something, anything, I mean, that becomes a kind of a big burden to put on a potential buyer in 5 years, say, oh, well, hey, you want to buy this place, if you plan on putting anybody there, you have to run a shuttle service. That's a big concern, number one, but then also the other concern is, yeah, in 10 years, if they want I think we need to think about future uses for this property. I mean, you're building 36, and it's a great project. I mean, it's an awesome concept, but you're building 36 units with basically one parking space per unit, and that's going to exist in 10 years. Chances are that building's going to be there in 10 years. So I think it's a somewhat of a big problem that deserves a little bit of thought.
Can we,
Yeah, to follow up
Jim?
on Commissioner Wiggins, for the record. To follow up on that, that's my concern, is that a new owner comes in and now he has all these spots to rent and no parking for any of these people. What they can always do is come back and amend the special use permit and say, we didn't even use a shuttle anyway. We didn't need to. Here's why we don't need it. Or a subsequent owner can come back. So my recommendation would be to keep this in perpetuity unless some other entity comes in and can explain why they don't need this. Thanks.
okay. Anything else? How about the developer? Mr. Peckham? Use your radio voice, please.
But wait, there's more. No, there's not. We need to sign in as well?
Please, and a green light. Thank you.
There you go. For the record, Jim Peckham, Executive Director of Fish. And
The conditions.
I have.
And are they acceptable?
Yes.
Okay.
And I appreciate the fact that people understand what we're trying to accomplish. And it's going to take people from menial jobs to meaningful careers. It's a transitional property that we expect people that while they're in the college program and transitioning to their new jobs and to new housing, it'll free up some other low-income housing. It will start to build the community to fill some of the jobs that are currently going unfilled because employers don't have the talent pool here. So we're going to build that talent pool. And if they go elsewhere to get the talent, there's no place for them to live, so they can't recruit from outside. So appreciate the understanding of what the program is. Currently, there are 16 motel units and 2 duplexes on the property, plus numerous storage sheds and different things. It's a bit of an eyesore. We're actually going to remove the train too, if that's okay with you guys. And the glass gazebo, and the picket fence if the wind doesn't remove it for us. So, we understand traffic patterns, and so we were, in our first thought process is let's get rid of the entrance onto Carson Street and make sure that people can only enter and exit the property off the side streets. I can't remember what other issues are going on. Again, I know our architect, John Kopelos, has some studies that he's looked at from a parking standpoint, and he's probably better than I to comment on some of those things. But I don't expect that this is a program that's going to go away as you start to look at low-income earners and automation. Cab drivers are going to be automated, long-haul truck drivers, hamburger flippers. I mean, there are going to be fewer and fewer opportunities for people to take on, these $8 to $10 to $12 an hour jobs. And we've already put one person through the program. I paid all their rent at their existing location. And by being able to build this, we can control what kinds of costs are going to be in the program to be able to help someone be successful. Took her 2.5 months to go through and get a certificate program, and she moved from $12 an hour to $19 an hour. So that now she does have a livable wage. The added benefit is her 2 daughters now she's a single mom, her 2 daughters are now doing their homework. They're like, dang, if mom's doing homework, we better. And they're starting to understand the value of studying and trying to get ahead. So our intent is so far showing up in generational poverty, trying to make an impact on that as well. So we think there's a lot of good things going on in here. And again, the whole project is intended to be transitional housing. So they will, as I call it, family dormitories. So the families will be able to live there while they're in the program and producing. We have a focus at Fish that it's a hand up, not a handout. So if somebody's not doing what they're supposed to, we will ask them to leave.
Can you address a little bit, Jim, the discussion we had about 10 years versus perpetuity versus use of the property and parking? And would you have a problem if we just made it forever?
No?
Okay,
I think John has some other comments on that.
all right.
Yeah, John Kopelos, I'm the architect for the project. We realize that the parking is an experiment for Carson City. This experiment is taking place all along the West Coast right now as lower income housing is being built, and Richards Crossing is an example of here in Carson City. As lower income apartments are being occupied, those people, they're getting subsidized rent to begin with. And can they afford a car? And how many can afford a car? And how many visitors and how much traffic is there? I kept feeding Jim the different projects I would run across in the architectural magazines along the West Coast. And typically, a lot of these apartments they have a little bit of commercial with them that the residents are able to use. They have one space per apartment. And granted, we're not LA and we don't have the same transportation, but I mean, Carson is working towards with their Jump Around Carson bus system, and we're hoping, I mean, we're 3 blocks away right now, we're hoping that we can petition Jump Around Carson to make that better. And when you look around the neighborhood, where's the grocery store? Where's the drugstore? All of this stuff is walking distance. I mean, this is where our country and our building and our planning has to move towards. The walkability of the city, the walkability of the neighborhoods. And I know we've all been built on the cars forever, but we're now 2020. We're not 1990 anymore. And yes, we realize this is an experiment, but Jim's willing to sign perpetuity to that experiment. And we feel confident that with the subsidized rents that have to take place in order to build this building and make it pay from a business standpoint, that this is going to work. So, and we're hoping that you as a planning commission will allow us this experiment.
Any other questions for the developers?
It's not a question, it's a
Comment?
comment.
All right.
I, for one, on the planning commission, am in total agreement with the reduction in the parking requirement. I think that it is long overdue for most municipalities to revisit their parking requirements and reduce them drastically. We're using up way too much valuable land for temporary parking of a vehicle. So with that, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you all very much. Any public comment at this time?
Denny French, Carson City, Nevada, Vice Chair and Commission. These seem to be hot pockets for me tonight, and as I looked over the agenda earlier, and I had questions that I addressed, but this was not one of them. The consideration of one spot per unit, and you're suggesting they're family related. That's a mom, dad, if you want to say traditional families, and several children of diverse ages. I honestly don't think that this is quite what would really work out as a good start for an experiment. However, if they were able to find a place that would allow them extra extended parking that would then be within a short walking distance of the units, that would be preferable to me. I don't see this really being a child-friendly location. My considerations as far as my early childhood development courses would suggest that kids are going to need a little bit more stretch room than's available here. Also, I think as far as contribution, as far as a project and such, it's not suggesting that each person in those units is involved with any program. They are the partner of or the family of someone that's in the program. So a little more clarification there for myself would help. And when I went over the 23 considerations, I didn't find any real problems with that other than I think that it's a tough goal to meet as far as an experiment, and I don't want to see them fail. But I just don't think the parking will allow for what they're considering. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Green means go.
Hi, my name is Jim Phillips. I live on Park Street, just east of this project. I would like to know what you're going to do when they can't park inside that project. Where are they going to go park? Now, I heard that there is going to be busing by Fish, and then I also heard a comment on that jag or jump around Carson. Are they going to put a stop there? What's going to happen? Now, it's going to be subsidized by additional funds from the government. What else is going to happen has there been a comparison to an existing property just like this up at University Heights Apartments, 205 units right beside the community college? What kind of security is Fish going to provide? 24 hours a day. There's going to be families in there. There are 24 two-bedroom and 12 one-bedroom, and you're going to have parking access on, what is that, Adams Street? So the commercial properties at the front, there's no parking on Carson, and there's no parking or very little parking on Adams. So are they going to come in on the lot and park in those 6 or 8 spaces that are just east of the commercial building? Those are concerns of mine, security. Fire department also, police. Who is going to manage and control that property? Are they going to have on-site management? Collect the rent? Provide security? Things of that nature. How much provision is there for recreation for kids? Pets? They talked about the pets and where are the pets going to go? Landscaping was touched on that. Owners are going to be, I guess, in town. And what are the rents? That's what I can think of right now.
Thank you, sir. Please sign in. Are there any other comments? Hope?
Denny and Jim both had questions on recreation and the amount of space for children. One of the conditions of approval, and I highlighted this in my comments, is the development standards do require open space, 250 square feet per unit. Number-wise, the applicant has indicated he's met that requirement, but I'd like to see a detailed analysis prior to any construction to verify it meets the qualitative requirements of providing space for recreation and so on. In terms of the parking, I'll say that for last. Security, fire, and police. The fire marshal has reviewed this plan and has made comments, which I believe have been incorporated regarding, given the height of the buildings, the level of access the fire department will need. There is not a requirement for on-site security. This will be an apartment complex like any other apartment complex. In terms of the parking, I'll speak now to some of the conversation that the commission was having regarding condition 13. And what you may want to consider doing if you want to, based on Commissioner Wiggins' comments, is modify 13 to say, this special use permit is approved based on the applicant limiting tenancy to those participating in the applicant-run job training program and the applicant providing a shuttle service to transport residents to classes. If this operation is modified, the special use permit is nullified and a new special use permit will be required so that the operator can explain how parking will be handled.
Okay.
I have a question for the developer. You guys had mentioned that it took a couple months, I think, to put the one person who's done this program through. What are the expected lengths of stay in this unit? Or will there be minimums, or just if you could shed some light on that whole subject.
Yeah, there's 4 kinds of programs that they have to qualify for, so they've got to take academic tests to make sure that they've got the math and English ability to be able to enter college. Right now, we're focused on IT, manufacturing, construction, and healthcare certificate programs. Some of those could go 6 to 9 months, so somebody might live there for as much as a year. The example that I talked about earlier, the young lady, we've got about 6 months is what we're planning on doing. So about 3 months of her going to school, and then 3 months for her to get a couple of paychecks so she can afford to move into other housing. Some other things on parking, just, I know that's not what you asked about, but Ubers are very popular, and as we're moving forward, we're not that far away from cars driving themselves, and people, there'll be a transition in our belief as technology changes that there'll be remote cars that people will be utilizing. We're also going to have facilities there for children's recreation. There'll be a play area in that on that property, and there'll also be a place for bicycle storage that's secured. And there will be on-site management for the program. And we have very strict rules. We've been running transitional housing for, 20 years. And we have very strict processes. And we explain that to the families that if they violate things, we put them out. Again, it's this hand up, you got to do your part. And if you do things that are disruptive, destructive, et cetera, they need to leave. And again, it wouldn't be all that dissimilar from a dormitory that a college might run, that if somebody's creating a problem in the community, that they get thrown out of the college. Fish is operated in that fashion and will continue to do that, though we think we're going to vet people well enough that that'll be a minimal issue.
Mr. Peckham, on the change to number 13, which basically says you can run it this way forever, but if it ever changes, you have to come back and get a new permit. Is that acceptable to you? And
I could live with that. The caveat is that, again, as technology is changing, I don't know that we will be providing, forever. Providing a shuttle van that, we're going to shuttle people back and forth, because I think that there's going to be driverless vehicles that will be available and we'll be able to do the same thing. But we're also buying bus passes for people. So, depending on how the technology changes, but until that happens, by all means, we're going to make sure that there's opportunities for people to access their computer, be able to get to class,
we're speaking
and et cetera.
more along the lines of if the concept changes because of the parking.
Yeah. No, I don't see any issues with that. I think that's fair.
All right. Anything else?
I'd just like to say before we vote that in regards to fish, I personally am a member of 12-step programs in Carson City and have been for several years, and I've met several people that have lived in your guys' transitional housing or whatever you call it. I can speak to the fact you guys have strict rules for them, and I can also speak to the fact that you guys have done really great things for the community. So aside from the concern with parking, I think that I'd like to put on record that I'd like to commend you guys for the work you guys do for this community. It's second to none. So thank you.
Commissioner Tingle.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I believe this is part of the Community Health Improvement Planning subcommittees that we're focused on trying to help with trainings in areas that would be supportive of businesses in the community. Healthcare.
Yeah, indirectly, a spinoff from the CHIP is a focus on transitional housing. And so that was what started it. And then this program, again, is we call it the ROADS program. NNDA, Northern Nevada Development Authority, is a part of it. The college is a part of it. The Circles Initiative is a part of it. Rural Housing is a part of it. So there's 7 or 8 partnerships that we have MOUs to be able move this whole program forward. So it's not a, Fish is taking on the housing portion of it, but there's a whole lot of other touch points and other people that are involved in identifying these people and helping them be successful.
Thank you, sir. Hope, do you have something?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you had brought up a question about the wording on condition 19. We've reworked it, hopefully to your satisfaction. To read, prior to the issuance of construction permits, a trip generation analysis contemplating the entire project must be provided for review and approval by the city engineer. Mitigations identified in the analysis must be implemented. We also, based on Commissioner Eswine's comments, are suggesting for conditions 21 and 22, we can add the wording at the end of each of those to say, provided the city engineer has agreed to the cost in advance of construction.
Okay, all right.
I have a suggestion about what Commissioner Wiggins suggested, and then in light of what we just kind of discussed, I think that's a fair point to make about 10 years is a long ways off, and personally, I hope that the jump around Carson system and the public transportation in Carson is much better in 10 years. So it may be, I think the in perpetuity thing is perfect, but in 10 years it may not be applicable. Can we instead just revisit it like Vice Chair Borders kind of alluded to? And I know 10 years is a long ways off, but can we revisit it in 10 years? Maybe make it in perpetuity with a revisit in 10 years, so if it's not necessary anymore, we can take it off?
Well, if we take the amendment that Hope proposed, I think we solve all those problems and we don't have to worry about it.
Is it proposed that we revisit it in 10 years?
No.
No, what it says is I'll read it just one more time because I don't want to paraphrase. This special use permit is approved based on the applicant limiting tenancy to those participating in the applicant-run job training program and the applicant providing a shuttle service to transport residents to classes. If this operation is modified, the special use permit is nullified and a new special use permit will be required so that the operator can explain how parking will be handled. So essentially, we recognize things may change. And I think the concern I'm hearing from this commission is when things and if and when things change, how is parking going to be handled? So it's very clear that that's the reason why, if this operation changes, this needs to come back to this commission, those questions answered. And the answer may be, they're doing self-driving cars. The answer may be, the jack system's really good. We don't have to provide a shuttle. And if that satisfies the commission, that satisfies the commission.
I'm less concerned about if it changes and just more concerned about in 10 years if they're doing the same exact thing. I think that was, if I understood Commissioner Wiggins' concern, in 10 years if they're doing the same exact thing and they continue, God willing, for 50, 100 years, shouldn't we revisit the shuttle issue in 10 years because we may need to make it for another 10 years? Or we say,
with the amendment, 10 years goes out the door. What's approved is what's before you until it changes. And when it changes, whenever that is, and if it doesn't change, it never comes back. But if it changes, it does come back.
okay, so if it never changes, it never comes back. So then, speaking to the concern that the applicant raised, that in 10 years it could be self-driving cars, who knows? You're saying in 10 years, the suggestion as written, if things change, they have to come back and file a new special use permit to amend it. So I'm
Right.
saying, why can't we just put in there that we revisit it in 10 years? If it's still necessary and the commission says, yeah, no, it's still necessary, we keep it going. Otherwise, if the commission at that time determines it's not necessary, I don't know that, why would we impose the burden on them to do another special use permit?
It's getting confusing. If we take out the perpetuity, we could visit it at any time. Because let's say that they put in hot little bistros in the front of this in the commercial, and the commercial people actually come to the place in droves and actually take some of the parking that's in the thing, plus the additional parking that's on there, plus parking along Adams Street and all over the place. Is this something that we want to address at that time too? We don't know what those commercial things are going to be doing. They're kind of an anomaly too.
So I suggest we revisit it. I don't know when.
I just think we're trying to over-engineer something that doesn't need to be over-engineered. Yeah.
I would open it, there's a problem, come back.
I would like Hope's proposal. I think that would, we're using the phrase shuttle transportation. Shuttle transportation could be a self-driving bus, it could be an Uber, it could be almost anything. So I think the concern that the commission has is that what happens to the parking if this all vanishes and Harry Schwartz comes and buys it and wants to build a brothel in there or something?
Yeah.
Then what do we do with the parking? So.
Just one other final comment. In Hope's opening, she misspoke, and for the record, I just want to make sure that we know we're talking about the whistle stop and not back on track. Though they have been closely related.
All right. Is there any other comment? All right. Back to the guys here.
Can I make a
Commissioner
motion?
Eswine, you sure may.
I move to recommend approval of LU-2019-0077 based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval as amended contained in the staff report.
Is there a second?
For the benefit of the record, we're modifying conditions 13, 19, 21, and 22.
Yes.
Yes.
And is seconded by Commissioner Tingle. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. LU 2019-0081, discussion and possible action regarding a request for a special use permit for a new wireless communication facility on property zoned general commercial located at 4209 South Carson Street, APN 009-12524.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant is seeking a special use permit for a 100-foot tall wireless telecommunication monopole to be located behind Burlington Coat Factory. The staff report has reviewed the standards associated with a telecommunication tower, as well as the 7 required findings of fact. The staff's primary concern was visibility from the east. If you are able to drive back there where the tower is proposed, you'll see the land to the east drops off severely. So we wanted to avoid sort of a back of house view for any future use that is built over there. So the staff is recommending that the base equipment be screened with a wall that matches the wall of the building so as to avoid this back of house appearance for the properties to the east. In your packet, I'm being brief right now, but in your packet, you have a lot of analysis, because I did go back initially to the applicant and said, well, wait a second, we just approved these other towers. Why do we need a tower smack in the middle? And they said they had contemplated that those towers were there and they still needed the additional capacity. And the applicant, Sarah King, can speak more specifically to that. They have also provided you with photo simulations of the property from 4 different vantage points, and those are in your packet. I will just say staff was able to make the findings in the affirmative, subject to conditions of approval, and we are recommending approval. Sarah King, the applicant, is present, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Are there questions for staff?
I got one question.
Go ahead.
I noticed the color of this is gray. Is that pretty standard for these things? I mean, I look at the hills and everything's tan and brown.
I believe there's a condition of approval regarding painting in a neutral color. Let me locate that condition.
And if it's quite all right, I am here representing the applicant, Sarah King. I'd happily address that. At this moment, I'm not sure I noticed a condition that specifically asks us to paint it. However, that's not a problem. So if it needs to be added, we'd be happy to take into account. Generally, it is just a non-glare metal, so it would come out kind of a gray, kind of classic metal color. But we can easily paint these things. So if you're looking for a neutral tan, we're happy to do that. So,
Condition 9 states that it shall be painted a non-glossy earth tone neutral color that blends with the surrounding natural environment.
perfect. And we have no problem complying with that condition.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, number 9 starts with the ground-mounted, but it does say the monopole. So yes, we are requiring that. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, and the other 8 conditions,
Are completely fine with us. They
Okay.
all are perfectly acceptable.
I'm sorry, there's 16 conditions.
And confirming, yes, yeah. There are,
Okay.
I read through the full list, and
All right,
I was
thank you.
very happy with all of them, so.
All right, is there any other questions for the applicant? Yes, sir?
I have a question. We just approved, I had to look back, and I think it was February, we approved a 70-foot pole. Now we're asking for 100 feet, and pretty far away, we can see this thing above the mountains. Is there a possibility with these poles to do 70 feet and then add on to them later if it's justified? Because in your plans in the very back, I noticed there were 4 levels of telecommunications on this.
Yes, there is a possibility of doing so. There are downsides to that, is if you build the pole tall enough to allow for co-location of each of the carriers, you don't run into structural issues later. So one of the biggest problems you run into is if you build a pole that's 70 feet tall, it's structurally built to a 70-foot weight limit, and the wind loading in particular, when you get antennas up there, you get a lot of wind loading that comes through. When we build at 100 feet, AT&T specifically does build for full co-location. So the structural they will build will be up to the task of bearing the weight and the wind loading and everything else that goes with all the carriers. So co-location of your other carriers becomes very, very easy. It's not like they have to get a crew in there and drop the pole and replace it with a brand new pole or anything like that. So it's kind of a building for the future mentality, is trying to make sure that as other carriers come along, because we know jurisdictions always favor co-location over anything else. They'd rather have a co-locate than a new pole. Is if we plan for that and we just make sure that the tower's tall enough that all the carriers can viably be on there without having to run into coverage issues where they're just not getting enough coverage because their antennas aren't high enough, or that they structurally have to start ripping the whole pole down and replacing it with a brand new one, and just the trucks and the inconvenience that can be for the community, is we just try and plan for the future and make sure that the pole is adequate from the get-go.
I am.
Okay, Hope?
Is it possible to design the 70-foot pole to the structural design of a 100-foot pole?
Not being an engineer myself, I imagine it may be possible. We could do theoretical calculations on it and essentially work to that end.
It just seems like, Hope, to me, that all these people come in here and they all want to build a big pole and they all want to co-locate, but the reality is the first guy that builds his pole is the co-location guy and everybody else has to go co-locate, or we end up with 14 poles with a single person on them. And I'm not blaming the applicant for that. There just something seems to be wrong with the way we're doing this. And I just don't know how to get around it. Because of all the polls we've approved in the last 3 years, I'll bet there hasn't been any co-location. So
Do you know if you sought to co-locate with the 2 poles I pointed out to you?
We did take a look at both, but per the alternative site analysis and I provided, is essentially we're looking to add both emergency services, wireless internet, as well as cell phone coverage to specifically that commercial region, just slightly north of where 50 hits 395. And both those poles take us so far out of the range that we won't be covering that actual community that we're looking for. So while we would ordinarily, we'd love to co-locate, to be honest. It's usually a cheaper option. It's more straightforward. We don't have to build our own compound. The leasing's much easier. So unfortunately, they just weren't within the physical distance that we needed them to be to actually provide the benefits to the community we were looking to benefit.
What is the physical distance you need?
Usually it's about, for wireless, wireless internet in particular, it's about half mile to a mile. And specifically, we're looking to get that commercial section right there with, I mean, I imagine most of you are familiar with kind of where 50 hits 395. There's a lot of commercial availability right on 395. And in addition, we're looking to kind of encompass as much of the residential communities around it as possible. The downside to wireless in particular is it's a line of sight. So it's a much shorter range. So the coverage we'll get out of this for phones will actually be broader than that. But for wireless coverage in particular, for internet, it will be a much shorter distance.
Was one of the properties that you suggested they check out for co-locating the one we approved at the Fandango, which is across the street?
There's one down south at the, it's the southernmost property, and it's on the east side of 395 where those storage units are. So that was one. And one to the north, which was, they just pulled a building permit. You did it. What was that? South Carson Street, like by the animal hospital. Yeah. So there's one, you know where that animal hospital is? So that's
we
to
approved
the
that
north, and then there's the one to the south, and those are both really recent. One's just pulled building permits, and one's getting ready to. And so I thought maybe she didn't know about them since they weren't built yet. And I said, well, wait a second, why do we need one smack in the middle? We got one there and one there. And
So to clarify, we did not suggest the one that we approved attached to the Marriott or the Fandango property. I know we approved it, I don't know if they're building
they're
it.
not pursuing that. That was the one where it came in on the east side. And we said, well, wait a second, we just approved one across the street. And they said, oh, that didn't work. We're building it by the animal hospital on South Carson.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for the applicant?
Will this be compatible with, excuse me, when AT&T rolls out 5G?
Yes, it will.
Is any public comment?
Denny French, Chair, Vice Chair, I'm sorry, and Commission. This is the area, thank you for asking the question about the 5G that was tops on this particular list. The tower that's on now at this time, Lone Mountain, it was scheduled to be 100 and something feet tall, as I remember. And because of the size and shape of it, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be awful because it's going to be on top of. In this case, this is ground level, as it is related from ROOP. The measurement goes up to the tower that's existent now on Lone Mountain, my understanding. This one's freestand from the pictures, and my concerns were that G5 is yet to been considered as far as its practicality around specific types of wiring and other logistics of the electrical units nearby. So those haven't been proven out to be compatible necessarily. I mean, it's still a work in progress. It's still consideration that has not been completely given the opportunity to prove itself out to be safe and considerate to other communication considerations. So those are my concerns, but seeing that it is a freestand, I'm just not seeing what your considerations were as far as concerns. I don't see your list usually as a containment or as a backup saying, this is what we'd like to suggest, and this is how we would have to word it, and are you okay with it? So I'm just not finding those as all. I see the materials and such like that. I think that's considerate and it's within, but I would rather see a gray or a light blue because that's more consistent with sky color and it would be less standard as far as having a brown or a black. So while I would want to have it camouflage where it closer to the ground, I don't know if it's just me, but I really appreciate the fact that I get a chance to bring these things up because I don't think they all are in people's scopes and that they be considered seriously because this is not a joke to me. These are considerations that mean a lot to me. When the services came in for the schools as far as their solar, they hadn't considered the noise that it takes to generate that comes along with what you pull in and then what goes out. And those generators were around where children were, and those sound levels were could be very destructive if a person.
So that has nothing to do with
Well, I'm trying to explain because I'm seeing there is some fatigue, and I don't want to add to your time, but these are serious considerations, and I appreciate your thought. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, Hope?
I think, Danny, what you were looking for, and I'm sorry I gave an abbreviated presentation to the commission. They had reviewed the report, but you were looking for the conditions of approval, and often in my presentations, I'll highlight certain pieces of the application that I think are of particular importance. In this one, the part I thought was really important was the visual part to the east where the land is far lower. And that was my primary concern. So I think I was a bit brief, but there are conditions of approval on pages 2 to 3. And because the city has built in so many requirements for these type of facilities, there's a lot of objective measures. So the subjectivity here is fairly minimal. Thank you.
Commission? Any further questions?
Was the one by the tower by the animal hospital, that was the one that came in with the picture and we required them to make it look like a tree, right? Are 100-foot towers too tall to make it look like a tree?
There are no trees around.
I understand there's no trees around. There wasn't any trees by the other one either. It's stuck 40 feet above houses.
Yeah, they are not. We can do a 100-foot tree, but the main argument against that is actually it's kind of a subjective argument on whether or not you think a tree is really an improvement in areas such as this where there are no trees, there's no foliage of any kind around it to help shield it. One thing you have to think about with the trees is that they have a 10-foot branch extension. So you have the pole, and then you have a 20-foot wide object. And I mean, it is a subjective evaluation, but for example, I think trees stand out more, especially in an open area like this, than they do necessarily a monopole where you just have the pole and the actual antenna equipment at the top. So in terms of your surface area visibility, if you're standing, say, 500 feet away from it, and you're looking at it, the pole's much narrower, and it's taking up less of your field of view. So if you turn around and turn it to a tree, you now have a 20-foot wide green object, and while it's green and it's sort of a tree, it's a much bigger object. So you're going to see it from further away. Like as you increase your distance, it's not going to start to fade into the skyline the way that, for example, a neutrally colored monopole will. So it's kind of a toss-up in terms of, do you consider putting the tree and you get a bigger field of view block, but you get maybe something that's a little more compatible with people's idea of beauty, or do you put the pole hoping that the reduced surface area gives you a better visual appeal?
Personally, I don't care if it's painted or if it looks like a tree. There just seems to be some concern about the paint, so I wanted to put it on the table.
Okay, is there any further discussion of the community? How about the commission?
I would just like to clarify one thing, that I don't mind this pole the way it is in its entirety, because I think now everything in South Carson is going to have to go on this thing, and we don't have to approach this issue again. So just wanted to clarify that.
Hopefully. Hopefully. In that case, you can make the motion.
I move to approve LU-2019-0081 based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Dawes. All in favor, further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Finally, item E8, ZA 20190005, for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for an ordinance related to marijuana dispensaries, amending Title 18 zoning, Appendix A, Development Standards, Division 1.2, Medical Marijuana Establishments and Marijuana Establishments of the Carson City Municipal Code to amend regulations governing hours of operation and signage for medical marijuana establishments and marijuana establishments. Heather?
Thank you. Heather Ferris again for the record. The applicant is requesting a zoning text amendment to allow for expanded hours and increase signage for medical marijuana dispensaries and marijuana retail stores. The applicant is proposing mimicking signage limitations of Washoe County and the hours of operation of the City of Reno and Washoe County. Currently, Division 1.20.2B of the Development Standards limits hours of operation for marijuana dispensaries and retail stores to 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. These hours of operation were established in 2014 with the adoption of the city's first medical marijuana establishment ordinance. At the time, the intent of the hours of operation was to allow dispensaries to be open during regular business hours, giving customers adequate time before and after typical work hours, and preventing dispensaries from being open during the late night and early morning hours. When recreational marijuana was legalized, these hours of operation for dispensaries were carried forward in the new ordinance. The applicant is requesting an expansion of these hours because the existing dispensaries in Carson City believe they are at a competitive disadvantage with dispensaries located in the city of Reno and Washoe County, which allow dispensaries to be open from 8 a.m. till midnight daily. Therefore, the requested hours are 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily. I did reach out to the sheriff's office, since they're the ones that really enforce this on a regular basis, if there were to be any issues. And their input was that they have no objections to the expanded hours. So with that input, staff is recommending approval of this portion of the request. With regard to the signage, the applicant is requesting modifications to 1.20.1H, which limits signage for all marijuana establishments to 30 square feet for wall signage and 32 square feet for freestanding signage. When medical marijuana establishment standards were first adopted in 2014, the permitted sign area for each business was limited to a maximum of 15 square feet for wall signage and 32 square feet for freestanding signage. And this was consistent with office uses as outlined in Division 4 of our development standards. This also provides for consistency with NRS 453A.350(1)D, which limits medical marijuana dispensaries to signage consistent with pharmacies and medical offices. So following the legalization of recreational marijuana, the city adopted regulations limiting the number of retail marijuana establishments to 2 and requiring marijuana retail stores to be operated within the same premises as existing medical marijuana establishments that's operating in good standing. The city also increased the amount of signage at that time for wall signage from 15 to 30 square feet, and the freestanding signage remained at 32 square feet. The rationale for the increase was that there's now 2 businesses located in one storefront, and they must be located per city regulations. Therefore, the 30 square foot sign would provide each business with the ability to either have separate signage or a combined sign of 30 square feet. And again, this gave consistency with NRS 453A, requiring that signage to be limited to pharmacy or office type signage. The applicant is now seeking to increase that signage limitation, proposing that signage be limited to that similar of other retail uses and a maximum square footage of 90 square feet. Staff is recommending denial of this portion of the request because the logic behind the 2018 amendment, which resulted in the current standards, is still sound today. As written, the municipal code is consistent with NRS, limiting medical marijuana establishments to signage consistent with office uses. Additionally, since we only allow retail marijuana establishments to be located on the same premises as the medical marijuana dispensaries, requiring the 2 uses to be housed in the same location, the increase in signage from 15 to 30 square feet for wall signage accommodates both the retail and medical businesses. This also puts each of the locations that we currently have on even footing, allowing them to have the same amount of signage. Also of note, I did look in to see what the two current locations have as far as signage. There's one location that has taken full advantage of the current regulations, while another location hasn't increased their signage at all. They still have a 15 square foot wall sign. The Planning Commission's action is a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. Staff is recommending approval of the request as it relates to the hours of operation, but is recommending denial of the increased signage limitations. Therefore, the draft ordinance that's included in your packet only addresses the hours of operations. The applicant, Will Adler, is here and may wish to address the commission, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions for staff?
Yes. Do we know, are either of these two facilities, the two existing marijuana retail outlets, are there any of those, are either of those two operating separate medical marijuana and dispensary and retail stores? Or are they?
It's my understanding they're both combined.
Yeah, that was my understanding too. I've been in Rise and it's all one place. So I don't see how, I don't understand how they could be operating separately.
So they have to be on the same premises.
Right, but how could, well, I guess you could have two separate businesses in the same space, but they're not.
Okay. Anybody else for staff? Yes, sir.
Hello, everyone. My name is Will Adler. I'm with Silver State Government Relations, representing both RISE and Sierra Wellness here today because this is a joint effort, as it were, from the marijuana industry. So plenty of puns to come, don't worry. Anyways, essentially on this staff request, we had both applicants basically, or both stores in town operate in other jurisdictions, one in Washoe County, one is another store in Reno, and they both operate at different store hours as is. And just operationally, they both sort of said, can we open later and why can't we open later? So going back to 2014, we did set up a very strict and sort of cautious, I'd say, medical marijuana program here in Carson City, and by design, and rightfully so, because we're sort of the smallest jurisdiction that did allow any marijuana medically. Most counties actually rejected medical marijuana. So this was actually just sort of natural in Carson City that we said, if we're going to do this, we're going to have a very limited scope, see how it works, and build it out sort of responsibly. So Carson took their two licensed medically, did that. And then sort of just time has gone by since then. Reno, when they did their recreational ordinance, did do a full expansion of hours to 12 o'clock. So did Washoe County, just similar stuff. And then just signage wise, everyone's done it differently, sort of regionally. Like you can paint whatever size sign you want on your wall as long as it's paint in Washoe County. But if you do it a metal sign, very limited to this 120 square feet is sort of cited here. Reno, basically if you could justify it, you can make it into a sign. They don't really limit you too strictly as long as you can sort of represent why you want to sign that size. So this wasn't a specific request as much as it was a request of, can we look at Carson City signing? It was 32 square feet as of 2018. We had a request from Rise in 2017. I think it was Rise. It was Rise because, yes, they're the one that still has the small sign. And that's why we changed it in 2018 was when we did the recreational update here in Carson City, there was sort of this gap in there wasn't a specific signing ordinance anymore because we accidentally deleted that. So we did get there in 2018, submitted it, and got to 32 square feet. Just because both the facilities in the past had asked for a signage increase, I included that in this application. This mostly was for the hours, to be honest, but both applicants had previously said we'd like to look at being under a retail code for signage instead of an office to sort of match just sort of their current business models. They're both very retail-looking establishments, and they live in strip malls with other retail establishments. So they point at each other's signs and say, "How come my sign's smaller than that guy's?" So that's where this came from more than anything. Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? Okay, thanks.
I have another question for staff. I think you covered this, Heather, but I was taking in a lot of information. What was the reasoning behind making the signs compatible with office or comparable with office as opposed to retail, given that they are retail establishments?
So we have a requirement in NRS that says that medical marijuana dispensaries are required to have signage that is essentially consistent with pharmacies and medical offices. So what Carson City did was point to what was allowed in their offices for other office uses and essentially adopted that standard for medical marijuana dispensaries. Then when the recreational marijuana was approved, they expanded that, recognizing that there could potentially be two businesses operating in one facility to allow for two signs or one 30-foot sign.
Anything else?
Well, this may be an sort of obscure question, but if one of these retail, if Rise were to close, say, and someone were to open another one, get a license and open another one, what zoning is required without a special use permit, or is it always a special use permit to open it? What zoning would it?
I believe if I remember correctly, without having the code open in front of me, I believe it always requires a special use permit.
So it's not getting zoned. Apparently from looking at the two, it's not like you can only open one in a place where you could only open a pharmacy. You can open it in a retail location, zoned retail location, if you acquire the special use permit, correct? Is that?
Yes, I would have to double check the zoning specifically, but yeah, you can have it. Both facilities currently are open in strip malls.
In retail location?
Yeah.
General commercial. So wouldn't it, I don't know, it seems to me, with ending my questions and making a statement, it seems to me that the sign ordinance seems a little antiquated considering we're not just doing medical marijuana any longer at these.
So the reason behind that, though, is that they have to be operating in a licensed medical marijuana dispensary.
Understood.
And medical marijuana dispensaries are required to have signage that's consistent with pharmacies or medical offices.
Completely understood. That's the antiquated part, in my opinion.
That's state law.
It seems.
All jurisdictions co-locate medical and recreational, like you said.
It is
It's unidentifiable in Rise. It's every.
Excuse me. I don't mean that it's antiquated. That part of the co-locating is antiquated. What I mean is the sign ordinance applying to that seems antiquated. I mean, I completely agree that you should put a recreational with a medical place. It seems to make sense, but considering that we allow them in general commercial retail locations, I'm not sure I'm following what the logic is behind limiting the sign. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying. I just don't see it.
NRS still requires the signs to be
So why is
consistent with
this in front of
pharmacies
us?
or.
Why is that part of the request in front of us if we're not, am I to understand we can't change the sign thing because due to NRS period?
We're not saying that you can't, we're recommending that you don't.
Right. So then the NRS, I mean, I hear you, but that's not it's not some boundary that is not
No,
overcomable.
but the logic that we used in 2014 and 2018, I think is still there today. But it's totally up to the planning commission as to what they recommend to the board.
Right. So just to kind of recap that, I understand the NRS, I understand everything that's said. What I'm trying to get at here is that currently we have retail or recreational marijuana facilities in general commercial zoning. So understand that law says one thing, but I also understand that lots of laws contradict each other, and that's why we're here today. So I hear you completely, but I'm not sure I agree with rejecting the sign or denying the request to allow for increased signage, considering a business right next door to this place. Literally, the same building, next door over, could have a much larger sign for selling electronics. So,
Unless it was a pharmacy.
but it's not, but we've moved on. It's not just a pharmacy anymore. And such as Commissioner Eswine pointed out, it's pretty hard when you're inside these places to tell the difference between the pharmacy side and the recreational side. Not that I've ever been in one.
Okay, all right. Is there any further discussion? Yes.
On that same subject, so pharmacies and doctors' offices are also limited to 30? Or-
Pharmacies are not necessarily. Medical offices, yes. Pharmacies is going to depend on where they're located. If they're in a shopping center versus just in other commercial use, a freestanding building, for example. That's based on a ratio of square footage per linear feet of building frontage. But again, what Carson City started with was utilizing the office standard, and staff is moving forward with that recommendation.
One other point I'd like to make is we only are allowing 2 of these, so I don't think we need giant signs advertising. I don't think the competition is out there. We have one north and one south, and I think you can probably find these places if you're looking for them. So
Well,
I'm
you-
okay with status
You
quo
could-
like staff
You
recommends.
could almost make that same argument about the hours if you've ever been in Texas on Saturday night, because they don't sell liquor on Sunday. So, prior planning, is always important to everyone. Okay, I think enough can I get a motion from someone? Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any other public comment? I apologize. Please sign in, make sure you have a green light.
Oh, there we go. Hi, my name's Travis Legatsky. I'm just a normal citizen, but I saw this come up on Facebook and wanted to come down and concerning this issue, I honestly think that there's a couple of really good reasons for passing this, and I am not related to their business or anything like that. I just have researched the topic of dispensaries and all that. I'm not even a patron or anything. Expanding the hours. A lot of people don't work normal 9-to-5 jobs, and that increases the tax revenue that the city can bring in without actually putting that burden off on normal citizens to help us keep getting taxes in without having to talk about income tax or raising property taxes or anything like that. I really also do think it's a good test case to look at the way alcohol and bars and restaurants are zoned and regulated. And if you look at walking right down Main Street, there's a giant brewery sign. I honestly don't see too much difference between that and a sign next to AM PM that's like 35 feet big, and or something like that. I really encourage you guys to pass this just because I think even with the 2, I think the hours help our tax base a little bit better, and then I just think it's time. Like you said, I think it's a little antiquated for the sign thing. I think they could do some really cool stuff with signage too, just like some of the bars, restaurants all do as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Okay.
Before we make a motion, I want to make one more plea on the sign issue. I think that the current code that applies to marijuana dispensaries' sign size is nothing more than a mechanism for control. And I think that I think everyone who was at the workshop last week realized I have kind of a soft spot for the mechanisms of control that are currently over marijuana dispensaries. Much like what was just brought up, you got bars open hours and signs that are huge and distracting, and I don't know that it's the government, it is any level of the government's place to step in and say, you can be in this normal location, but your sign can't be that big because there's only 2 of you. We can find you, release you. That's a great point, totally accurate. I don't know that it's our place to say, well, you can't have a sign that big because you sell weed. That's basically what we're talking about. You can't have a sign bigger than this size because of the product you sell, which has, by the way, been voted on by the citizens of this state to be legalized. I don't think that is any form of government's place. They should be treated like the business next door. So, with that. That's it.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right.
I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval, actually, I'm going to make a motion that includes approving of the sign. So I don't want to get into a point where I make that motion, then it gets denied and we run into trouble.
In that case, then,
Make 2 motions.
Make 2 motions? Okay. So, it's kind of written. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of ZA 2019-0005, an ordinance amending Title 18 Appendix Division 1, Section 1.20 to expand hours of operation for medical marijuana dispensaries and retail marijuana stores.
I'll second.
is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Our motion carries.
Okay. So I have, I make another motion. I further move to accept the request to allow for increased signage for these facilities. Do I need to add more verbiage to that? Okay.
Yeah, how big? The maximum allowable size of 90 square feet?
I want it to be in line with general commercial, so I would think that would be,
Recommend to the Board of Supervisors,
I move.
not accept the request, recommend to the Board of Supervisors.
So I further move to accept the request, recommend to the Board of Supervisors to accept the request to allow for increased signage for these facilities in line with in line with other retail uses.
Okay, is there a second for that motion? I second. There is a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No? No? All right, 2-4? Okay. If motion fails, 2-4. I'm sorry? All right. Staff reports.
I think we should be revisiting all of the signage for retail,
And
not just specifying.
That was one of the things they asked me about when I tried to be on here. I agree. I think this ordinance is kind of outdated.
staff report.
Yes.
You gonna tell us about the cement, the asphalt? Okay.
Okay, in terms of future agenda items, we'll have a zoning map amendment coming forward. That was part of the master plan update in the northeast corner of the city. It's south of Kelvin, where we have those 1 acre lots that are zoned CR. You had an outbuilding in that area. And so we'll bring that rezoning to clean it up. We have a tentative map at the corner of Clearview and Silver Sage that'll be coming forward. A special use permit for a sign at the Children's Museum, a right-of-way abandonment, and I expect Tahoe Western Asphalt will be back before you in February. The reason is the appeal is going to the Board of Supervisors at their February 6th meeting, I believe it is, their next meeting. At that, I'm asking the Board of Supervisors to refer it back to the Planning Commission. And I'll explain that at the Planning Commission, but there's new information. And because the Board of Supervisors don't do what's called a de novo hearing, a de novo hearing is like a do-over. Rather, they look at your record and they decide if you made the right decision based on your record, which means I can't enter new information into the record at the board meeting. So to get this new information into the record, it has to come back to the Planning Commission. So I expect you will see that in February unless the board does something different. The Board of Supervisors at their last meeting approved the tandem parking ordinance as proposed by the commission, but they also expanded on it to say they wanted some of the criteria, if you will, that was put in for the single-family homes, put in for the PUDs as well, where there weren't requirements on the size of the parking space or the length of the driveway and things like that. So they actually improved upon the tandem parking regulations for PUDs. They approved Anderson Ranch. They made some modifications to it, including limiting the homes along the northern property line to a single story. I think that was the most significant one, and there were some other minor changes. That's the one that stands out as substantive, but they did approve that 4-1. At the second meeting in February, I'm expecting that they'll make the appointment for the vacancy on the Planning Commission. So right now, Mark Sattler, he has moved out of the state, and you do have a vacancy, and we are aware that you have a vacancy. And I know that there are applicants who are interested who have come to see me and talked about what you do. So we'll see who goes before the board in February and who they appoint. Thank you.
That's the advertisement says that's an unfulfilled, or, yeah, it's a term. A continuation of a term, and it shouldn't be. It should be a new term.
You're correct, it should be a new term, so I'll speak to the city manager's office and make sure that's advertised properly. Right now, based on my conversations with staff in the manager's office, they're looking at the second meeting in February for the board to do interviews. But that could change, that's just tentative.
Will that get us a commissioner by end of February then?
I'll make them come.
Is there anything else for staff?
Are we able to get any more information on that asphalt plant? Are you able to reveal any more about the new information that has come forward?
I mean, just real briefly, Ben and I were able to go to Fernley and tour the facility in Fernley where they had the success story with the RTO system. But we also were able to understand the differences between that system and the system we have here. And so the person we met with suggested a different, I don't want to say instrument, but a different method of addressing the odors based on the type of facility that we have here in Carson versus what he has in Fernley. Additionally, the applicant is proposing some new equipment or additional equipment to NDEP that they believe will address the situation. So since they're proposing something new and the staff is reconsidering what the right answer is, and I've met with NDEP, I want a chance to talk to the commission about that.
Thank you.
Hope, are we going to put election on the agenda?
Yes, I double-checked the bylaws after I met with you, and the bylaws actually call for it in February. Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Any other public comment?
Mr. Vice Chair and Commission, tonight I've had an unusual circumstance for myself. I actually got pissed off. And I apologize that my color and my mood and my posture may have indicated that. If it didn't, I think you all weren't paying attention. The deal is that I have concerns about health and safety. Those are things that I find very tough to let go. My hackles go up when I think perhaps I haven't been able to, because of my frustration with my communication skills, been able to put out to you the consideration that those towers are not just benign. They put them that tall not just for facility to site, tower to tower, but because of the safety considered on the distance between people and those towers. I was concerned when they put the one up on Lone Mountain. I'm not so concerned because of the considerations for the height, but that the G5 is a yet unproven to be safe situation for people's health. And because we can't see it, because we can't smell it. Radiation is still real, and it took years to convince people of that. Geiger counters were invented to show that. We don't have ways yet to show the participation in our brains and such that do us damage every day, from sitting too close to a screen to being close to a facility that's generating a certain amount of power. I think that under the circumstances, you handled me well, and that I appreciate, and by no means mean to reflect my lack of respect or appreciation for what you do every day that you come out. But I have to tell you, those things are upmost to me, and also it's hard for me not to grab up Hope and just want to give her a hug, because I think as much as we'd like to develop out and we don't want to stop, that your job is to say, we're not ready for that yet, or we can't support that yet. That, I think, should be part of your job. If it's not, it really needs to be. And I think that that then helps inform the mayor and the Board of Supervisors. And so just like your consideration for the sign or the color of such or the height of such, those things help inform the community. And this format was very hard for me to follow. It's not similar to what I've been used to. I can't relate directly to the book because it doesn't say the page number certain things refer to. It says the ordinances. So I had a great difficulty, but as usual, staff has been very helpful there. I'll conclude my evening with thanking you again for your efforts and appreciation for your work. Good night.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Anything else from anyone? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Second. We're adjourned.